Hey guys, so this is the listing entity that we set up in the last video, and this is kind of a representation of how we want the database table to look like for this. But we don't actually have this in our database quite yet, and we can actually confirm this by opening up a terminal window and then just looking at our database. So I'm going to say pSQL and then the name of my database. And if you don't know the name of your database, if you come over to the root directory, our ORM config, and it has the database name right here, and we're currently in the development connection, or the development. This is what we're doing locally. So if I run that, I can do \d and I can see all my tables, and I can see I just have a users table right now. Now if I were to actually start up my server, it should go ahead and sync up and create a listing table for me, and the reason for that is I said synchronize true. Now this is great for development because I didn't have to do anything. I just create the entity and I start my server, and then bam, everything's synced up. I have my database table. But this is not great for production. So what I want to show you today is how you would handle this, how you might make a database change if you have a database in production. So the first thing I'm going to do is just turn this to be false. And we're going to do something called migrations. So migrations are how you change databases. And with TypeORM, it's kind of bittersweet. And the reason why I say that is it's a little annoying to get set up, but once you get it set up, it has a pretty sweet feature that not too many other JavaScript ORMs have, or I guess TypeScript ORMs too, for that matter. So let's take a look at how we get this set up. So I'm going to do \Q to exit out of this, and we're going to be using the TypeORM CLI to do the migration stuff. Now this is actually located in node modules under the bin directory. So I'm currently in the package, the server package right now. So if I were to do an ls on my node modules, all the executables are stored inside of the bin folder, and then there's this TypeORM. So if I do an ls, you can see it's there, and I can just ls node modules /.bin, and then there's a couple other executables that I can run here. And so what I mean by executable is I can actually just do /node modules /bin and then run TypeORM, and it actually runs the CLI, and we can see here's the output of the CLI. Here are all the commands we can run. So we're going to be using these right here. Here are the migration ones. And now the first one is pretty simple. It's creating just a basic TypeORM or basic migration file. Now if you want to do this, this is very easy to do. So all you have to do is you can just run it like so if you wanted to. So /node modules, all that stuff, and then you can say migration create, and you have to give it a name. You give it a name using the -in flag. So I'm going to call this migration 1, and what it does is it'll create an empty migration file. So for me, it added it right here. I guess this is in my server folder, and it should also create a migration folder over here. If you don't, you can just right click on source and create a new folder called migration, and really you want to move this into that if you were to use this. But you'll notice right here, you'll just give in pretty much a blank file, and there's this up and down function. So, and we don't want to change anything here. So in up, what we want to do is these are where we want to type our changes for changing the database. And what we do is we say query runner dot query, and this is going to return a promise, so we're going to say await, and then you actually just type SQL code here. So I could say alter table blah 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 blah, right? So users, maybe I want to change something, and you can actually write your own SQL code here. Now feel free to do this if you like, but I don't really want to write all SQL all the time. I'd rather have a tool that generates this for me, and that's where TypeORM comes in handy, because it'll actually automatically generate the SQL that you need to run, which I really like, because it'll allow you to then read it, and then you can change stuff, but the bulk of the boilerplate you don't have to write. So we're going to do that, and this is the part that's a little harder to get set up. So we're going to trash can that, but again, you could do that if you wanted to. And we're going to use this generate function. So generate a new migration file. Now it's actually a little bit difficult to get this set up, so I'm just going to kind of walk you through some of the errors I had when I was first setting this up a while back. and how you solve those or work around with those. And real quick, I want to just mention you can also run this by using npx if you're on the latest npm. So I could say npx TypeORM migrations and create. Alright, and so this is also a way you can run the CLI through that. So either one works. And I just create another migration. I'm going to delete that. Alright, so first off, if I just try running TypeORM migration generate, we'll get rid of this thing at the end. I'll talk about what that is in a second. So here I said generate, and then I gave it a name, so I'm calling this migration stuff. You can call it whatever you like. It's probably better if we called this, maybe listing table. But when I run that, it says no connection options found. So if you get this error, what that means is the CLI was unable to find your config file or your ORM config. And for good reason, right? We're currently in the server package. But if I go up 2 directories and do an ls, you'll see my ORM config is actually there. So my ORM config is in the root directory. So you may be wondering, maybe we can run it from the root directory. And you kind of can, but you'll see we get other errors. So the next error we will get if we try running this in the root directory is you cannot find the connection default. This is a fine error that we can actually fix. And what it's saying here is there's not a name called default. So we have test, development, and production, but none of them are called default. So by default, it looks for something called default. So we can say -c at the end here and tell it which connection to use. So I want to use the development connection. That's what we want to use locally. So I'm going to say -c development. And by the way, you would do it like this also if you're doing in production, but I'll talk about that at the end. And the next thing it says is no changes were found. So for me to explain what's going on here, I have to tell you how generate works. So what generate does is actually looks at your entities. So we currently have a listing and a user entity. And then it also checks the database. And it says, are they different? In our case, they are different because there's a user table, but there's not a listing table. And when there's a difference, it'll actually spit out the code or the SQL that you need to run to basically make the database look like how your entities are. Now it says it didn't find any changes, and what that means is it's unable to basically find the entities or find changes and stuff. Now you can see right here we've pointed to where the entities are, and you'll notice how we're pointed at source entity and we're looking for this path right here. But you'll notice we're in the root directory, so you may be thinking, alright, maybe I change to packages/server/source, and you can change stuff here. Or maybe you can play around with the CLI directory here as well. I haven't had much luck trying to do that method, and here's what I've gotten to work with the least amount of hassle and errors down the line, and that is to just copy the ORM config into the server directory. So we now have 2 ORM configs. They're the exact same. One's here, one's there. Basically, we're just using this ORM config in this package so we can get the CLI to work. So now I'm going to cd into packages server, and I'm going to try running this command again. And we're going to run into our next error. So here, this is a new type of error, really. It's a syntax error. And this is because we're using TypeScript. I guess we need to compile our code. I'm not quite sure the details on this one. But to get this one to work, we need to run tsnode in front of it. And then I'm going to point this at the node modules path again. So /node modules /bin/TypeORM. So this is the command we want to run, and that'll go ahead and generate some stuff. So let me bring this to the top so you can see what's going on here. So basically I just prepended to the front tsnode around this whole command, and that works. So now you should have a file inside of your migration folder. And now you can see it generated a whole bunch of SQL for you. Now, because we just made kind of a large table, this is not very helpful, right? Look how long the SQL is, and it's kind of hard to read all this. In production, you probably do want to just go through that and make sure everything it's doing is correct and accurate. But when you add individual tables or individual columns, it's a lot more manageable to figure out what's going on, and you can actually read what it's doing, which we're going to do in a second so you can see what I'm talking about. Alright, and also it'll automatically create the down. So the down is, I want to reverse these changes. So the reverse obviously here is just killing the database, right? Or not the database, the table. So we just drop the entire listing table if we want to revert this change. Now we can actually use the CLI over here to run it if we wanted to. So we can see all our options. There's the run, there's the revert. Now I actually wouldn't recommend doing it through the CLI like this, just because it's a little bit harder to do in production. What I really like to do is this, to do it actually in my code. So in start server over here in our source, we have this create TypeORM connection. So inside of start server, and we don't need to do this for test, but here I'm going to say const connection, and I'm going to say connection.run migrations, and I'm going to say await because this returns a promise. Now what's going to happen is every time I start this server, it's going to check first if the migrations have been run, and if they haven't, it's going to go ahead and run them. So it'll automatically run these for us. So now if I do yarn start, we can see it actually running it. Now I'll show you how it actually keeps track of this so that you know whether or not migrations have been run. So this migration has been run. We can see here's the SQL that it did for it. If we started the server again, it would not just re-migrate. It would just say, and you can see right here, it would say server is running on localhost 4000, and it doesn't do this whole insert stuff it did above. And so let's take a look at how it knows that the migration has been run. And you can see right here it's saying select from migrations. So we're going to see what that is. So again, open up our database, and if I do /d now, you should see the listing table along with two migration thingies. So if I do \d on listing, you can see, and it should have all the columns that we specified in our entity over there. Now the migration is kind of interesting. So this is how TypeORM knows whether a migration has been run or not. It'll create a table called migrations, and we can actually select all from migrations, and we can see the name of the migration. So here's listing table, and if I come over here, I can see here's listing table. So all the entries in the migration table match up the name over here. So if it's in there, that means the migration has been run. Now for whatever reason, if you wanted to rerun a migration, all you would do is you'd come over here and you'd say delete from migrations, and you'd say like where ID is equal to 1 or something, right? And that would delete the migration, and you could just start the server up again and it would rerun it. Alright, so that's that. We created the table in our database using migrations. One other thing that I wanted to do real quick was add another field to our listing. One, to show you how that migration looks, and two, because we actually need another field, and that is a relationship field to the user. So our listing is going to have a one-to-many relationship with user. So our user can have many listings, but our listing only belongs to one user. Now to generate this, we're going to be doing this straight from the TypeORM documentation. Now I actually don't really care for the way they do it because it's a little bit weird how they have this set up. Their example is pretty much spot on to what we're doing. Their photo is our listing and their user is our user. So we're going to copy this, paste it over here. So I'm going to import this, and I'm going to do it like so. And now we're going to import our user and import user from /user. And then here you specify the key. So here I'm going to say listings, and I'll talk about a second what this is right here, and it'll be red at first like it is for me, but we'll be fixing that. And then here you can specify the name of it, so user is fine. You could call this owner if you wanted to, or whatever. And now we need to add some stuff on the other side of the relationship, so on the user side. and we can copy this here. So paste that in, and again we're going to import, and I'm going to change this because we're not using the type variable, and we're not using photo, we're using listing, and again this is not the right path. I'm going to say / listing, and so this is going to be array of listing. I'm going to say listings. So here I'm going to say listing.user. Alright, so you'll notice this .user at the end, and you'll notice also that this was red over here and now it's not. The names correspond, so the names are meaningful. So I said listing here because it says listing here, so that's basically how you associate it. Now I'm naming it the same thing as the name over here, basically with an S, so it makes sense to us, but I could name this whatever I wanted. So I could call this field Bob, for example. TypeORM doesn't know that Bob is this is the other side of this relationship. So the way you do it is this bit right here, and I say user.bob. So I'm telling it this end of the relationship matches up with this end over here. Again, don't use this naming convention. We're going to call it listing, but that's what that name is and how you figure out what the name should be here. So again, users here, so user's going to be over here. And again, this part's just a variable name, so I could call this X if I wanted to. But the data type, if you hover over it, it's a listing. Alright, so that's that. Oh, lowercase l, there we go. Alright, so now I can run the migrations again. So I've added another field. So I'm going to come up and I'm going to generate, so I'm going to run the exact same command here, and I'm going to say listing user, you know, call it whatever you like, and it's going to create another file for us, or at least it should create another file for us. There we go, a little slow. And here it is, and now you can see this is a lot more manageable to read. The name is a little bit long, but we can see it's altering the listing table, it's adding a user ID, and then it's also adding a constraint for it that it's a foreign key, and we can see exactly that it's referencing the user table, so perfect, that's what we want. And now if I do yarn start, and again if we want to confirm that it actually is changing stuff in our database, we can see there's no user table or user over here. So I'm going to say yarn start, and it's going to automatically create a foreign key, and you'll notice over here you can see what it's called. So it's going to call it user ID, and that's what it calls it right here. Now you might actually not want it to be called user ID, right? So I mentioned you could call it owner, for example, so we'll look at how you could do that too. So alright, so we can see it adds the listing, or the user ID I mean. So listings, and we can see now we have a user ID at the very bottom. And you can see it didn't run this again and crash or whatnot, so it just runs the one it hasn't ran. And if we come back over here to listing, I can actually change the name of that. So you saw that I named it user ID. Maybe I want it to be called owner ID or whatever, right? So what I do is I make a column for that, and it's going to be the type UUID, and this is going to be a string. And then here I specify the name, so I'm going to say column name, and the name is going to be owner ID. So the part right here, I called this owner ID. So now this is a field that we can actually access. So this is the ID of the user over here. This is me just changing the name, and again we can go through the same process if we wanted to, of generating this and migrating it. Now be mindful when you're doing changes like this and you're doing the migrations to actually read it. Data type user is not okay, yeah, so I just forgot, it is not called column, it's called join column when I do this. So we can say join column, and then we can put the name here. So paste that in. and now hopefully it should generate correct SQL stuff. But what I was saying before with this is when it generates, okay, cool, it generated. When it generates this, do double check it's doing what you want it to do. I've used this before in practice, and sometimes it doesn't always, the SQL doesn't make sense, or it's doing an extra thing I don't think it needs. So I actually just will like go in and just like straight delete some of it, and I think that's totally fine. I like how it creates a lot of the SQL, and I really like that it does this, and I can easily just kind of read through it and then delete what makes sense and what doesn't. But you can see right here it's killing, I guess it's killing the constraint, and then it renames it, and then for whatever reason it sets it to not null even though it's already null. See, so like this right here is like I think is a dead command because I think it's already not null, but it's doing it again. But we can run this and it will rename the field. Now I'm not actually going to keep this name because it's owner ID is kind of I like just user ID better, and so I'll just keep the default. So I guess I could create another migration if I wanted to, but I'm just going to leave it like so. And for development though, I'm going to keep the ORM config over here and keep the synchronize on to true, but this should give you an idea of how you actually go about doing migrations. And now for the production side of things, I just added these 3 migrations, right? And I've now migrated it locally. I guess I went ahead and changed everything. But yeah, I migrated the tables locally, but the production has not been migrated yet. So what happens when I push my code is it's just going to start up the server, and then the first time it starts up, it's going to run the migrations that are just sitting in this folder. So you don't have to do anything extra or special like running the CLI before it starts up. You just start up your server regularly. TypeORM will go ahead and run the migrations that are different on your production database, and it's as simple as that. So that is it for this video, guys. I'll see you in the next one.